večer. Sound is good. Zdeňku, drahý Mohamede, prosím. So let me welcome you here by Association of Friends of Palestine in Prague, Czech-Palestinian, where we have this incredible luck and honor to have Mouin Rabbani with us and Izzat Karaki from West Bank. Everything happened by a great chance because, as you probably know, Mouin lives in Canada, but he was going to Berlin. Things are happening in Berlin, as we know. And Izzat is here on invitation of Tadamun, the new Arab Culture Center with Teresa. If you want to know more, follow Teresa and Tadamun. And we will begin with Mouin giving a half an hour presentation. And then we will join with Izzat for Q&A, basically. You can join, everybody will have space to ask questions. But we will need to finish by 6:30 or 6:40 maximum. So we need to respect that time. There is another program, musical program, so you can stick around. So let me just introduce Mouin first. He's a researcher, analyst, and commentator specializing in Palestinian affairs and Arab-Israeli conflict, meaning all the countries in the so-called Middle East, West Asia, to be correct. Plus Iran, which is not an Arab country, but goes in the same region. Known as Middle East, I said that, sorry. He has, among other positions, served as Principal Political Affairs Officer with the Office of the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, researcher with Al-Haq as well, West Bank affiliate of the International Commission of Jurists, which is collecting evidence of Israeli war crimes. You may remember in 2022, Al-Haq offices and other 6 human rights and civil society organizations were, the army raided them. They destroyed all files, documentations of these war crimes, and called these civil society organizations terrorist organizations. This is not the first time. Even the PLO efforts, diplomatic efforts for a two-state solution were called by Israel diplomatic terror, and on and on and on. So, the same as when Rabbani is co-editor of Jadalia, where he also hosts Connections podcast, co-hosts the long-form Conversations podcast, and edits Quick Thought features. He's also contributing to editor of Middle East. Rabbani is senior non-resident fellow at the Middle East Council Global Affairs Center and non-residential fellow at the Center of the Conflict and Humanitarian Studies. And the list could go on. So in order to have some time for this discussion, we have to strip you of all the positions you are representing or have been. We decided today the topic to be who really killed the two-state solution, because it's really frustrating to all the time hear that it was the Palestinians who didn't want the state, and these talking points which only repeats itself, but because most of the people don't have the time to go into the history and don't know the facts, so most of the people don't have the arguments. So I know we have only 30 minutes, and I will shut up now, so you have more space. Let's get into this so everyone can know what really happened and what the Palestinian diplomacy has been since even before 1948. Thank you so much. Giving the floor to Mouin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. It's a real pleasure to be with you this evening, and I'm very grateful to the Friends of Palestine Association, and particularly Yana Ridvan, if I pronounced that correctly,
yes,
for
thank you.
organizing it this evening. And as Yana indicated, the topic, can you hear me in the back okay? Yeah, the topic of my discussion is the two-state settlement in Israel-Palestine. And I think it would be useful to begin with a brief discussion of the origins of a two-state framework and how this came about. And its origins lie in the British mandate in Palestine. Prior to the First World War, Palestine had been part of the Ottoman Empire. In the aftermath of the First World War and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, Palestine was separately ruled and administered by Great Britain as the British Mandate of Palestine under a League of Nations mandate. And that mandate incorporated what was known as the Balfour Declaration into the terms of the mandate. In other words, Britain committed itself to establishing what it called a Jewish national home within Palestine. But at the same time, you had two diametrically opposed forces. First of all, you had the Zionist movement. From the British point of view, I think, a Jewish state in Palestine was not necessarily their objective. As the first military governor, British military governor of Jerusalem, Ronald Storrs, put it, the British objective was to have what he called a Jewish Ulster in the Middle East. In other words, a enclave, a minority enclave surrounded by a hostile region that would be loyal to and dependent upon the continuing patronage of Great Britain. The Zionist movement had a very different agenda. It wanted to transform what was an overwhelmingly Arab territory into an exclusively Jewish state. And then, of course, you had the Palestinian national movement, the Palestinian Arab nationalist movement, which wanted neither the British nor the Zionists to have any role in governing Palestine, let alone in transforming it, either by establishing a Jewish national home within it or transforming the territory into a Jewish state. And their agenda was very much one of national independence. And these three forces were in growing competition over the 1920s and 1930s until in 1936, one of the largest rebellions against imperial power during the interwar period erupted in Palestine, beginning with the 6-month general strike from April to October 1936. And the British then established what was known as the Peel Commission. And the Peel Commission report of 1936 was really the first time that what became known as a two-state settlement was formally put on the agenda. The Peel Commission recommended the partition of Palestine into two states with population exchange, in other words, the forcible expulsion of all Arabs from what would become Jewish state and of the small number of Jewish settlers in what would become an Arab state. And the Peel Commission was not only categorically rejected by the Arabs in Palestine, but it in fact led to a significant escalation of the rebellion against the British. And it was, and it basically died a quiet death. But it laid the basis for a partition proposal, and then came back in 1947 with the passage of United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181, which recommended partition of Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state with economic union, and with Jerusalem and its environs to be to be ruled separately, particularly in view of its religious significance for the three monotheistic religions, to be ruled as an international zone. But unlike the Peel Commission, the United Nations partition recommendation did not recommend and in fact explicitly prohibited any forcible expulsion or population exchange. This UN resolution allotted 56% of mandatory Palestine to the Jewish state, even though the Jewish population of Palestine, overwhelmingly recent immigrants, constituted only 1/3 of the total population of mandatory Palestine, and controlled only 7% of the land of Palestine. Nevertheless, the partition map roughly reflected the pattern of Jewish settlement within Palestine that had begun in the 1890s until 1948. And if you overlay a map of kind of the boundaries of Jewish settlement by 1947 over the map that was proposed by partition, they have a lot in common. And the UN, of course, in the 1940s was a very different organization. No African countries, I think with the exception of Ethiopia, had gained independence and were members of the UN. Most Asian countries were not members of the United Nations, and both the United States and the Soviet Union and all their proxy governments supported partition. And so once the US, Washington, and Moscow came out in support of partition, it was essentially a done deal. And this resulted, of course, in what is known to Palestinians, and I suspect also to many of you, as the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe. Palestine was erased from the map as a result of the ensuing conflict. Israel came to possess not the 56% of Palestine that had been allocated by partition, but 78% of mandatory Palestine. And curiously, the authors of the partition recommendation never demanded that Israel withdraw from the additional 20+% of mandatory Palestine that it conquered during the Palestine War. And in the meantime, the Palestinian people, more than 3/4 of those who lived in the territory that became the State of Israel, were ethnically cleansed, and as a people were essentially transformed into stateless refugees. 21% of mandatory Palestine became the West Bank, and another 1% in the southwestern corner, coastal area adjoining Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, became the Gaza Strip, which has been so much in the news the past 2 years. Now, there's of course a question, well, if the UN recommended partition and the establishment of independent Jewish and Arab states, why wasn't a Palestinian state established in 1948? And the answer is quite simple. From the 1930s, there had been active collusion and cooperation between the Zionist movement on the one hand and the Hashemite leadership of what was then Transjordan on the other hand, to prevent a direct conflict with them, and as part of that agenda, to prevent the establishment of an independent Arab state west of the Jordan River. And it was essentially agreed between the Zionist movement and the Hashemite leadership that the Transjordan could seize and control and eventually annex the West Bank. And that is exactly what happened. As for the Gaza Strip, it was ruled by Egypt, administered by Egypt, but Egypt never made any territorial claims on the Gaza Strip. It administered the Gaza Strip as an integral component of Palestine, according to Cairo. And what is important to recognize, I think, is that after 1948, what became known as the Arab-Israeli conflict completely overtook the question of Palestine. And Palestine and the question of Palestine and the Palestinians were essentially reduced to a humanitarian refugee issue and was not given much political significance on the international diplomatic agenda. This began to change partially after 1967. Of course, in 1967, Israel launched a war initially against Egypt, during which it seized the remaining 22% of mandatory Palestine, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And the United Nations Security Council 242, which was issued at the conclusion of that war, focused very much on Israel relinquishing the territories that it had conquered during that war to the Arab states that were ruling it prior to the war in exchange for diplomatic recognition and normalized relations with the Arab states. In other words, even though only Britain and Pakistan ever recognized Jordan's claims of sovereignty over the West Bank, 242 initially envisaged Israel returning the West Bank to Jordanian sovereignty rather than to Palestinian sovereignty, and the same applied to the Gaza Strip. And in fact, in United Nations Security Council Resolution 242, Palestine and the Palestinians are never mentioned. They are only referred to indirectly with the phrase, a just resolution of the refugee question. But at the same time, one of the most profound political consequences of the 1967 war was the emergence of the Palestinian guerrilla movements of the PLO and its constituent factions, who managed quite successfully to put Palestine and the Palestinians back on the political map, on the regional and the international map, as an independent political factor. And we began to see the consequences of this in the aftermath of the 1973 October War. In the aftermath of that war, in 1974, we see that the PLO achieves recognition as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people by both the Arab League and then the United Nations. In 1974, United Nations General Assembly, the same but a now much larger body, the same body that had passed the partition resolution in 1948, in 1974, formally recognized the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination without external interference, including national independence and sovereignty. In other words, in 1974, it became the will of the international community, not only that Palestinians exercise self-determination, but also that they establish an independent, sovereign state. And then in 1974, the Palestine National Council, which was effectively the Palestinian parliament in exile, adopted what was known as the 10-point program, calling for the establishment of what it termed a fighting national authority on any part of occupied Palestine that is liberated. And this was interpreted at the time, quite rightly, and opposed at the time by other Palestinian forces, also quite rightly, as indicating acceptance in principle by the PLO leadership of a diplomatic resolution with Israel on the terms of the two-state paradigm. We're talking here, just to recall, about 1974. And in 1976, in fact, the PLO explicitly supported an Egyptian draft resolution in the Security Council that called for a two-state settlement. So who was opposing this draft? Well, Israel, of course, categorically rejected it. The Palestinians supported it. And the reason I said draft resolution and not resolution is because it was vetoed by both the United States and by Britain. So it never became a Security Council resolution. And the reason that Israel, Washington, and London opposed it was because it called for an independent Palestinian state in the context of a two-state solution. And we see that from the very beginning in 1967, Israel immediately annexed East Jerusalem. And as you know, probably, Israel's claims of sovereignty even over West Jerusalem have never been recognized by the international community, because as I pointed out earlier, the partition resolution of 1948 specified that all of Jerusalem should be governed by an international regime. And so therefore, even Israel's control over West Jerusalem, its claim of sovereignty over that part of Jerusalem since 1948, was never recognized by the international community, and only recognized by the United States in 2018, I believe it was, during the first Trump administration. Now, so Israel in 1967, it annexed East Jerusalem. It emptied some of the villages in what were known as the Latrud corridor, basically on the border of the West Bank and Israel, and emptied them of inhabitants, and immediately began with the establishment of what were intended from the very outset as permanent settlements, in order to ensure permanent Israeli control over at least significant parts of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. In other words, Israel from the beginning never had any intention of relinquishing its military conquests of 1967, leading to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. In 1981, 1982, there was a further diplomatic initiative known as the Fahd Plan, Fahd being the Saudi official who at the time was the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, very close to the Reagan administration, and put forward a proposal, again, that explicitly called for a two-state settlement. There were strong divisions within the PLO about whether to accept or reject the Fahd Plan. And in 1981, initially, it was not accepted. But in 1982, it was endorsed by both the PLO and by the Arab League. So certainly by 1982 at the latest, one can clearly state that both the PLO and and the Arab League formally supported a two-state settlement to the question of Palestine. Israel, by contrast, consistently rejected it. And here we begin to see also the hypocrisy of the West, which likes to refer to itself as the international community. They strongly encouraged the Fahd Plan. They insisted that the Arab states and the Palestinians must accept it. And the moment it's accepted, they do absolutely nothing to promote its implementation, but continue supporting the sabotaging of the very terms whose acceptance they had promoted by continuing to either enable and support the expansion of Israeli settlement activity, or, for example, keeping their markets open for Israeli settlement products, which of course made the settlements viable, and so on. I'll now fast forward to 1988 and the Palestinian Declaration of Independence on the 15th of November, 1988. And by this point, the PLO was formally in support of a two-state settlement, and in addition, began the process of formally recognizing Israel. And you can think of the Palestinians in this process as a hamster in a wheel, and that the faster the hamster runs, the longer it stays in exactly the same place. And what do I mean by this? The Americans demanded that the Palestinians accept the principle of a two-state settlement. When the Palestinians did so, they were told, no, you have to explicitly recognize UN Security Council Resolution 242. When they did so, it's actually, you have to recognize Israel. And when they recognize Israel, that's not enough. You have to recognize Israel's right to exist, and so on. So every demand produces a new, the meeting every demand produces only a new demand, because it was never the intention of the Americans or the Europeans to implement a two-state settlement. Their objective had always been to weaken the ceiling of Palestinian political demands and aspirations, and use every Palestinian concession as an incentive to demand yet more concessions, because every time the Palestinian leadership met one of these demands, there was never any countervailing pressure on Israel to reciprocate in any fashion whatsoever. And this leads us, of course, to the to the Oslo Agreement. And whenever I speak about the Oslo Agreement, I always like to point out it's a very short document. It's only 3 or 4 pages. It's written in plain English. You do not have to be an international lawyer to understand it. Even people like you and me can read it and understand it. And I would urge all of you to read it. It does not mention Palestinian statehood. It does not mention Palestinian self-determination. It does not even include the word occupation. And I'm happy to discuss this in more detail during the discussion, but the point I want to make is that Oslo was never intended as a framework for implementing a two-state settlement. Its purpose was to recalibrate and reconstitute and perpetuate Israeli control over the Palestinians and the occupied territories, because the First Intifada had demonstrated to the Israeli leadership that the existing pattern of relationships, the status quo, had become untenable. It was on this basis that we then began to see the so-called permanent status negotiations that were supposed to have been concluded no later than 1999, but that really only began at the turn of the millennium, 2000, with the Camp David summit in July of 2000, with the Clinton parameters in December of 2000, with the Taba negotiations in 2001. And again, we can discuss this in more detail, but it was here that for the first time we began to see US endorsement, Israeli acceptance of Palestinian statehood, but a very different state than the one envisaged by what could reasonably be called a two-state settlement. As with the partition resolution, the Israelis wanted the Palestinian state to reflect the broad contours of Israeli settlement activity, particularly in Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank since 1967. In other words, there was never any intention to withdraw to the 1967 boundaries, but rather to keep those areas where most settlements had been established since 1967. By contrast, in 2002, the Arab League endorsed what was known as the Arab Peace Initiative, again a Saudi initiative. And this called for not only a two-state settlement on the basis of a full Israeli withdrawal from all the occupied Arab territories, meaning including the Syrian Golan Heights, in exchange for full diplomatic relations and normalization with every Arab state, but it was subsequently also endorsed by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, meaning that this framework was formally endorsed by Iran, by Pakistan, and by every other member of the OIC. But here again, it was rejected categorically by Israel. And in fact, Israel's immediate response to the Arab Peace Initiative was to launch Operation Defensive Shield, its invasion of all Palestinian cities in the West Bank in March, April of 2002. And it's important to recognize by this point, Israel had largely relinquished the agenda of seeking an agreement with the Palestinians in order to secure its own interest. By this point, Israel had reverted to its policies between 1967 and 1993, by which I mean unilateralism. And the Gaza disengagement of 2005 is, I think, an excellent example of that unilateralism. And since then, we've really had only one further example of serious Israeli-Palestinian negotiations to achieve a two-state settlement, and that was the so-called Olmert Abbas talks of 2008. And those did not result in an agreement, because by the time the Israeli Prime Minister made a proposal to the Palestinian leader, he was already on his way to prison. And the Palestinian leadership at the time, quite rightly, decided it could not accept an agreement that was never going to be implemented by the Israeli leadership that had offered it, because its replacement, its successor, would say, well, you know, this commits only the guy in prison, not us. We have a completely different view of how to achieve peace, but we will begin negotiations from the basis of all the concessions you made to our predecessor. In the meantime, of course, settlement expansion not only continued apace, but began to expand exponentially. So in conclusion, I think it's important to state that Israel has, since 1967, never accepted either full withdrawal to the 1967 borders or full sovereignty for a Palestinian state within those territories. And this is kind of the required minimum for any two-state settlement. Israel has only, and only at particular times, accepted its own version of a Palestinian state, and that is a version that is inconsistent with the fundamental requirements of a genuine two-state settlement. The PLO, the Palestinians by contrast, and also formally including Hamas since 2017, have accepted a two-state settlement as understood by the international community. And the formal Palestinian leadership has also accepted that the refugee question would be resolved on the basis of a negotiated resolution that would be consistent with the principles of a two-state settlement. In other words, it has essentially agreed that recognition of the Palestinian right of return would not necessarily mean its full implementation by every Palestinian entitled to that right. And then the question becomes, apart from the rights and wrongs of the two-state settlement, is it feasible? And many people, of course, in recent years have made the argument that Israeli settlement expansion has developed beyond the point to which it can still be considered feasible. I've never accepted that premise, because I don't think we're dealing with a situation where you can make a mathematical calculation that if you have X number of illegal settlers and Y number of illegal settlements in Z total square kilometers of territory, then a two-state settlement either is or is no longer feasible. It's ultimately a matter of political will. You can have one settler and one settlement in the entirety of the occupied territories and no Israeli withdrawal because there is no political will. You can have 3 times as many as you have today, and if there is political will to compel Israel to withdraw to the 1967 boundaries, it can happen. So it's ultimately a question of political will rather than any numerical calculations. Of course, it becomes much more difficult when you have a situation like you have today. But there really essentially is no point of return. The more interesting point of view from my view is, if it remains feasible, is it desirable? And I think an argument can be made that at certain points in history during the past half century, it has been both feasible and desirable as producing the beginnings of a comprehensive, just, and durable resolution of the question of Palestine. But I think in 2025, we can reach a conclusion that while a two-state settlement, at least as a theoretical matter, remains feasible, a peaceful diplomatic resolution that allows for the continuation of the genocidal apartheid regime of Israel is no longer desirable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mouin. Can you join us? Yeah, I think, when you speak, you just have to turn on this one. Okay. So again, I will introduce Izzat is from Youth Against the Settlements in the West Bank, actually in the heart of Hebron, which is by many called the microcosmos of the occupation, because you have the settlers in the heart of Hebron. So we will first start with the questions about this process, so-called peace process, and what you just learned. And then we will ask Izzat to firsthand tell us what does it mean to live under this occupation, and we can continue with more questions about whatever you will want to ask. Are there questions right now?
Of course. Good evening, and I thank you for the very insightful lecture, and especially to those who are not fully aware of the past history until today, whether of the occupation or of all those attempts to reach a peaceful or a two-state solution to this matter. I just have one remark which relates actually to the latest or the end of your lecture, when you said that nowadays, especially now, with facts that are there actually on the land, in 2025, do we believe that it's still viable to have a physically possible, to have this two-state solution in the form in which many European states have recently declared their support of that? Again, to me, it's more of a cosmetic, again, thing, the same like with the partition plan. Because, and that's where I maybe question or disagree a bit with the fact that it does not matter how many settlements and how many kilometers are taken by settlers. I do believe that it matters in the form of this, not only their size, but their location and the way the illegal settlements have been legalized and very fast process of the far-right government now in Israel to make the illegal settlements legal and being part of Israel, and then the new plan which would literally split whatever remaining part, the West Bank, into an upper and lower part that cannot be connected because of that, while the pace and aggressivity of settler attacks in the recent days and months only adds to that, with many other factors. So that is what makes it, I believe, unviable physically, not only due to the expansion of the biggest illegal settlements in the surrounding of Jerusalem, but the location, the pace, and the legal framework in Israel. So, of course, with the mood which is there, the mood in Israel nowadays is not on its own right and far right. There is nothing like left anymore. Even the opposition, all the opposition, with all sides of it, has the same mood nowadays in Israel. So this is what makes me believe there is no actually any intention whatsoever to move forward with that solution.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're entirely right when you say there is absolutely no intention. My point was not to argue that there is any intention. I mean, you mentioned the recent spate of recognitions of Palestinian statehood, and the Western governments that recognize the Palestinian state, if you look at their statements, they all said that the reason they were doing so was as a measure of support for a two-state settlement. But they have actually done absolutely nothing to enable that settlement, because they continue to treat settlement products as wonderful things to have in their markets. They continue to allow their own corporations to conduct business with these illegal settlements. And it's important to recognize that last year the International Court of Justice not only ruled that Israeli rule in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip is illegal and illegitimate, but also put forward clear obligations on UN member states in order not to be complicit with continued Israeli.
Yeah, just
in
will do it very
2016
short,
already,
like
the
just
United
introduce
Nations
myself,
Security
talking a little
Council
bit of
obliged UN member states to distinguish in their dealings between dealings with Israel and dealings with the occupied territory. So my point was not about whether these governments or Israel are serious, what you say about the shift in Israeli politics to the far right is entirely correct. Rather, I was making the point that if you are going to conclude that a two-state settlement is no longer feasible, it's quite clear who bears responsibility for this. It's the state that has been working, for the most part, day and night over the past nearly 6 decades, with a specific agenda to ensure that a two-state settlement cannot be implemented. But at the same time, I'm saying that in my view it remains feasible, because if the international community were to decide that it wants Israel to relinquish its control over the territories occupied in 1967, it can quite easily leave Israel with no option but to do so. But it hasn't.
Is there a question right now? There we go.
Thank you.
That's it.
مساء الخير، شكرا كثير أستاذ معين. رح أحكي بالإنجليزي. I guess all the arguments and the historical context that you framed the discussion on makes perfect sense, but being a little realistic, I guess, as a Palestinian, let me ask what your opinion on this is. If the two-state solution remains viable and the baseline for us moving forward, and obviously there's no point in discussing whose fault it was, because clearly Israel is the occupying power. It's the more powerful side. It's the more potent side. It's the one that has been able to sell its narrative internationally. Hopefully things have been changing in the past 2 years. But who bears the moral responsibility towards the Palestinian people in being an enabler, in being a tool of the occupation, and believing and leading the people in Ramallah, at least, and around, to believe that they are a viable state? It's like they've been lied to, and now they believe the lie themselves. With red carpets, you don't become a state when you call yourself a president, and you don't become a state if you have a red carpet at the tarmac. And when was the point of moral clarity that maybe they should have accepted the failure? They attempted in good faith. They accepted the Oslo Accords. They tried. They failed. And maybe it was time to dismantle the structure and present the world with the responsibility to react to Israel's occupation and no state. Thank you.
Well, I think your question is about the Palestinian leadership. and at which point the Palestinian leadership should have basically renounced the Oslo agreements. I don't think that was ever an option. I think the right time to have done that was before it happened. In other words, the proper approach would have been, and here I'll just take 2 minutes to talk about if you look at the original Oslo agreements, it talks about a comprehensive Israeli withdrawal from the occupied territories, with the exception of East Jerusalem, settlements and military installations. That's about, at least 70% of the West Bank, if I don't have the exact figure, if not more. By the time you get to, this was in September 93, by the time you get to Oslo II, at the end of 95, you begin to see the introduction of Area A, in which full Palestinian control is reduced from 70+% of the occupied territories to most of the Gaza Strip and 12% of the West Bank. And you get this Area B of joint jurisdiction, and then you have Area C of the area of full Israeli control, which comprises about 60% of the West Bank. By that point, it was too late. The Palestinian leadership had become too invested into the Oslo process. And the only time that it would have been realistic to have urged a different Palestinian approach was before they signed Oslo, was that the Palestinian leadership should have insisted, unless there is a comprehensive moratorium on settlement construction, for any reason whatsoever. You can have all the babies you want. You can import all the Russians you want. I don't care what your excuse is. You build one room and it's over. You have a full moratorium on settlement construction until the process is concluded, and you make explicit that the process will conclude with a comprehensive Israeli withdrawal to the 1967 boundaries, etc., etc. Absent those conditions, it was obvious, at least to me already in August 1993, when I first that it was never going to work, and it was going to lead to what we subsequently saw. I think you can make a strong moral or political argument that, once all these things began going wrong, that the Palestinians should have. And you can argue that the Second Intifada, in part, is a response to your question. But I think once you signed the agreement, once Israel began handing out VIP passes and monopolies on trade and so on, it was never going to happen.
Is there another question right now?
There is a remark. I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry. I really need to say the remark that I can say without the mic.
But please, we're limited by time.
No, it's just a remark. And I wanted to say in the beginning, and I just, evaporated. It's the Oslo, the original thing. When they went to Oslo, they went behind the back of the leaders of the first Intifada, the people who had really, at the first Intifada, achieved things. They achieved things, and when they went to Oslo, these people were brushed away. They were not taken to the table, and it was a treason to whatever the first Intifada did. Whatever victories were there, they were not used. Nothing was used. No power was leveraged. While at that point, there was a much of a room to apply much more and gain much more if people who became in the power in the Palestinian Authority didn't go behind the backs of the people who really fought during the first Intifada. And that's this treason made all whatever they gained in first Intifada, and they could leverage and build on it to get more and push Israel more into exactly like a moratorium on settlements and other things as well that they had obtained. There could have been none of those that are there, that evolved with time and grown into large settlements that are now part of big Israel. All this happened because in the early beginning, there were people who were influential enough to look forward into all those and other benefits that we could see shamelessly, big cars being driven around Ramallah between the two intifadas. It was a very shameful sight, and I went there and I know it. And that is, I believe, one of the reasons why it took the wrong course.
This was like people around Hanan Ashrawi. I remember reading about it, but I would be interested in your comments, because they were like frustrated because they did not even know that Arafat and others were holding these secret peace, Oslo talks or whatever, how you want to call them.
I don't think there is anything in principle unacceptable about holding secret negotiations. It happens all the time. The real issue is what was agreed to. And I mean, even, you know, the PLO leadership exploiting the formal Madrid track negotiations between the delegation led by Haidar Abdel-Shafi and the Israelis as camouflage to conduct secret negotiations with Israel. Even that is not, I think, objectionable as a matter of principle if the outcome would have been very different. The problem became that the Oslo negotiators were prepared to make fundamental concessions that ensured that the national objectives of the Palestinian people could never be reached from within the terms of the agreement that they concluded. That was a fundamental problem. If they would have reached, you know, if they would have negotiated in secret because either the Palestinians or the Israelis needed to conduct covert talks about an agreement for a full Israeli withdrawal to the 67 boundaries and resolving the refugee question in accordance with international law and so on, no one would have complained about the secrecy of the talks.
Okay. Natasha, I wanted to ask, can you probably come closer? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk. My question is, we spoke about a two-state solution. There has been also for many years talk about one-state solution. So what's your thought about that, and if it is more feasible in current horrific situation? And then also there is an Israeli-Palestinian initiative called A Land for All, which is more like a kind of confederation. I don't know if you know about it. So what would you think about other alternatives in comparison with two-state solution, and what's worse? Which one is worth pursuing? Thank you.
Thank you. You're asking, I think, a very complex question. I'll begin my response by saying that I think we need to recognize that Israel is an ideological state, meaning, as I think people in this country know very well, you know, the Soviet Union could not exist without the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The state was a creation of the party, of the ideology, and when the party collapsed, the state disintegrated. I look at Israel in much the same way. Israel is the product of Zionism, and Israel exists because of Zionism, and without Zionism you can't have Israel. It's very different than a country like the Czech Republic or Germany next door, where you can have very many different forms of government, you know, whether it's the Habsburg Empire or whatever, but the state has characteristics that extend beyond the ideology underpinning it. And based on that, I believe that you cannot have an Israeli state that is not a racist apartheid state, that is not a threat to the entire region and its security and stability. And in addition to that, you know, also have a state and a regime that is guilty of genocide. And I think genocide must come with consequences. If you had asked me this question a few years ago, I think I would have given you a different answer, and this would reflect, I interviewed Edward Said about a year before he passed away, and as you know, probably in the late 1970s, he wrote a book, The Question of Palestine, which was seen at the time as the most eloquent defense of the two-state settlement. He received death threats from Palestinians because of that. But by the time of his death, he had become a very eloquent and vocal proponent of a one-state settlement. And he opposed Oslo, not because he at the time believed in one state. He opposed Oslo precisely because it would make impossible two states. It's the same reason Haidar Abdel-Shafi opposed it. It's the same reason Noam Chomsky opposed it. And when I interviewed him about a year before his death, I asked him, you were supporting a two-state settlement, now you're supporting a one-state settlement. So do you think that all this activism against the occupation is misguided? And he said, no, absolutely not, because in his view, it remained essential, because the prospect of Israel being forced out of the occupied territories could, in his view, have a transformative effect on the Israeli state, on Israeli society, on Israeli political elites, and could open the way to a peaceful transformation from a two-state settlement to a one-state solution. I think back when he made that statement, I think it made a lot of sense. I don't think that holds anymore now. If you look at how far right Israeli political spectrum has shifted, if you look at how addicted to warfare the Israeli state has become, I don't see how, and if you look at how unwilling Israel's Western sponsors and allies are to exercise any pressure on it. All the pressure is against those who want pressure on it, not on the Israeli state. I don't see it happening. And then you ask me what I think is a perfectly legitimate question. Okay, so how do you propose to achieve that? And that's I think a question I don't yet have an answer to, because I think there was a period where you could make the argument that the dynamic for a changed relationship could have come, at least in part, from within Israeli society. I don't see that happening anymore. There was a period where you could say the required pressure could have come from within the region. I think that's increasingly unlikely. And even less likely now, at least now, is pressure from the international community. And even, people always like to compare it to South Africa. The sanctions movement against South Africa was morally and politically very important, but it was primarily the uprising of the population within South Africa that brought the white minority regime down. So you're asking a question, I think, that needs serious consideration and a serious answer, which at this point, I unfortunately don't have.
I have a feeling this microphone works better.
Okay.
and wait.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, 1 second. Let's let also Izzat get into the discussion. So introduce your organization and talk a little bit about Hebron, so we can engage him in the questions as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here today with you. Thank you for Friend of Palestine for organizing this event. I am Izzat Karaki. I'm Palestinian from Hebron. I just left Palestine, or I just left Hebron on Thursday to be here for a few days, just to explain a little bit about the life under the occupation, especially in Hebron. Hebron is one of the most intense cities to live as Palestinian. So many people ask, why is that? Because Hebron is the only city you could find settlements and settlers between Palestinians.
It's a good.
So, and not only that, what makes it more hard for us as Palestinians, we are not equal by law. So living with two people living in same area under two seats of law, like as Palestinian, I'm under the Israeli military law, and the settlers are under Israeli civil law. This is the real meaning of apartheid. Why you have two people and they are not equal. I'm always guilty as Palestinian till I prove that I'm innocent, but for them they are always innocent. They never get accountable. Most of the cases when they attack, beat, burn, they did anything, they will not be accountable for their crime. Just right now, I got a news from my friend, they are burning a village north of Hebron. Settlers attack the village, burn the properties of Palestinians. They could do that easily. Their government on the back, and now we have very extremist right government. So they give them the green light to do whatever they want, and they will never be accountable at all. For me, I see Hebron going to the black side, or it's going like, to be more difficult, more hard. We see that their plan is very clear. They want to displace Palestinians and bring more settlers. So Hebron, in the past we used to have 4 settlements in the city center of Hebron, and now they are trying to get more and more. So what is the idea? That they don't want to see Palestinians and settlers living together. So that's why I said, for me, a two-state solution, it will be impossible to happen because of that. None of us will leave Hebron, for example. This is my just, opinion as Palestinian. I see settlers every day. We are not equal. They are trying to make our life hard, difficult as much as they can to make us leave. We are facing ethnic cleansing every day. If you knock any door in Hebron or wherever in West Bank, you will see that we are suffering from them in a way or in a different. What makes me feel unhappy, sad all the time, that seeing them, it changed the city in front of my eyes. So right now, if you go to Hebron, because Hebron is divided into parts, H1 and H2, I'm living in H2 area, which is under Israeli military control. Around H2 area, we are talking about 22 Israeli checkpoints, over 120 watchtower and camera. Hebron is the only city, the military is more than the civil people. So we have a few hundred settlers, 400, 500 settlers. They have 800 soldiers to protect them from the terrorists, because they consider us as a terrorist. For me, as is that if I want to reach my house, I have to cross it through the checkpoint every day. So, which means that if you go outside and come back 10 times, each time they have to cross. Each time you have to cross through the checkpoint to let you get into your house. It's not that much easy. So all the time you have to put everything in your pocket on a table and then go through the metal detector. After that, they have to check your ID if you are registered or not. 2015, they apply system number. They give us a number. We are not, according to them, we are not a human anymore. We are just a number for them. So for me, I have a number. My friend doesn't have, he cannot come to visit me. There is no relative. There is no social life. Something very important you have to know about H2 area, how they are trying to displace Palestinians from that area. They are trying to isolate you from the world. But so you will think that you have to leave because you cannot handle it anymore. So there is no social life. They will never come to your house and throw you out of it. But no, they make it impossible for you to leave, and then you will leave by yourself. This is their strategy. But for us, we have a mission. That's why if you go to Hebron, if you go to H2 area, there is no empty houses. So they have a plan, but also we have a mission to protect our land, to protect our houses. While it's difficult, hard, but we don't have option. So many people ask me why you are going back to Palestine. Stay here. Why I should stay here? I want to go back to my country. I want to go back to my city, because I don't want them to take everything from me. I don't want to give them my identity. It's my land, it's my home, it's my house. Why I should give it to the other people who don't deserve it? And it never was about Israeli and Palestinian, or Jewish and about Palestinian. We used to live together before. but I will never accept the occupiers. There is occupiers and there is occupied people. There is oppressed and there is oppressor. So how come I can live with those people? So it's really hard, it's really difficult, it's really complicated for us as Palestinians to continue with this situation. But at the same time, as I said, this is what they want. They, with Ben Gvir, with the Smotrich, with all this leadership, they are, the settlers getting more violence. I think you saw that, recently. You can see that in social media. It's very obvious that settlers can attack, beat, do whatever, burn, do whatever they want, and in the end, they will not be accountable. Now, if I leave from Hebron to for example, to Bethlehem, where is the mountain? There is a settlement. This is what they are doing right now. They are trying to connect all the settlements together, while it's not their land, or they don't own it, but they don't care about the owner. They only care about themselves. They only care about how we can make it more hard for Palestinians to remain in their houses or to remain in their land. Where I live, for example, now October, November is the season for picking olives. Believe me, for 2 years now, none of us pick their olives because they prevented us. How they prevented us? They declared the area as a closed military zone, and then none of us can go to their land or go to their olives. And if you can go, they will attack you, beat you, to let you, go away from your land. You have to forget about it. And most of the land the Palestinian family were attacking were in Area C. In the past, they used to attack Palestinian in Area C, but nowadays we see that they are attacking in Area C, and also they started to get into Area B. So even Oslo agreement, which is disaster for us as Palestinians, but now they don't respect it, and they are going into Area B, and later on they will go to Area A. So none of us can stop them. They have all the power to do whatever they want. And something very important I want to share before I end my speech, because I know she told me let's make it as a discussion and a question. So settlers have power more than the soldiers themselves. I see that very clearly, that settlers give order to the soldier by attacking, arresting, detained Palestinians. So being under military law, which means that they took all your rights and give it to the other people. Thank you so much.
Do we have a question now? Another one?
I would ask you,
Okay.
you said, it is my
Mr. Matelin, can you come here?
Yes. Hello. Lovely to see you here. It is my understanding you have just come very recently here.
Yes.
And how did you get out of Palestine? I guess that you have been given some special permission from the military suppression authorities to be allowed to leave. And do you think that you will be allowed to return back to your homeland?
Leaving Palestine is a big story. For me, I was dealing with Vienna Red Office for almost 40 days, getting a visa. I give them a lot of document just to give me visa for 20 days. I have been in Vienna. I had a workshop there, and then I come here. Leaving from Palestine, it wasn't easy. I spent entire day between the border because we don't have airport in Palestine. We don't have airport in Palestine. I fly through Jordan or through Amman. So I went early morning Thursday. I went to 3 borders because we have to cross the 3 borders: Palestinian border, Israeli border, Jordanian border. It was intense, it was difficult, it was hard because there are so many people are leaving and coming back. So, but I did it, and I was excited to be abroad because I haven't been outside talking, sharing about my life. for 6 years because of Corona, and then the genocide happened. So it's difficult, hard, but as I mentioned, it's very important, to be abroad, sharing about your life, about the occupation. So many people know a lot about the genocide. They know about Gaza, how much they are suffering, but they don't know that people even in West Bank are suffering from the occupation. Especially for us as Palestinians living in Hebron, under the Israeli military control, it means a lot. And it means that they don't see you as normally human being. For us, really, they don't see us as normally human being. They see us just like anything, like as a house, as a tree, as a street, they don't consider us as normal human being, and they don't see that we are equal because they consider themselves as the chosen people. So it was hard to leave Palestine, but I did it because I was happy about it and excited at the same time.
Thank you. Do you have another question? Maybe I will do a question which many would like to ask, or because we have to counter, a lot of hasbara here. And the favorite point is that, if it was not the PLO, it was the Hamas, which was the obstacle to negotiations, two-state solution. You touched on the topic, but would you elaborate on it a little bit?
Yes, well, it's certainly true. If you look at Hamas's original charter from 1988, it rejects any concept of a diplomatic resolution with Israel. That's certainly true. But there are three relevant factors. The first is that Hamas was not building settlements. Hamas was not undermining, Hamas was not enabling the consolidation of the occupation. And at the same time, and you read this also in numerous books and articles and interviews with Israeli leaders, from the very beginning, Hamas leaders in their discussion, I'm talking about the late 1980s already, in their discussions, if they were in prison with Israeli leaders or called in for interviews, they were repeatedly proposing, offering basically a two-state settlement. Get out of the occupied territories and you won't have an issue with us anymore. And they would refer to it as a hudna, which means a truce. Now, from their point of view, it was an indefinite and therefore permanent cessation of hostilities. And from their point of view, Hamas was not prepared to recognize Israel as an organization. And I think their explanation for this was entirely reasonable. They said, look, when the PLO signed Oslo, the Fatah movement never recognized Israel. It was the formal national leadership that recognized Israel. So if even your friends in Fatah haven't recognized you, why should we? And already beginning in the 2000s, if not earlier, the Hamas position was that if the PLO, if the Palestinian leadership successfully negotiated a two-state settlement with Israel, and if such an agreement was either ratified by what it called legitimate Palestinian institutions, meaning a PLO that incorporated Hamas, or in a national referendum, then Hamas would pledge to respect that agreement and not to undermine its implementation. And on top of that, in 2017, Hamas issued a new political program where it explicitly identified a Palestinian state in the occupied territories with East Jerusalem and its capital, and a just resolution of the refugee question as its political objective. So, the idea that Well, Hamas didn't exist for the first 2 decades after the occupation. So if Hamas is the obstacle, how come nothing was achieved before it existed? It's always someone else's fault. The occupier is always the victim. The more settlements it builds, the more it's the other side that's responsible. You can't have it both ways. You can't always be the victim of those who you oppress. You can't always be the victim of those who you're killing and those whose land you're stealing. It doesn't work that way. And I think for years it worked very well for Israel. But no one believes them anymore, and for good reason.
Thank you. Is there more questions? Yes.
Mr. Professor, why do you think that the Western states have supported Israel for such a long time, the political elites, for such a long time, having been absolutely silent about all that violation of international law, and what's more, humanity and injustice, which is somewhere above, highly above international law? Why do you think that they have been, where are the objective sources of that blindness and shameless attitude?
Well, I don't think there's a single answer that applies to all Western governments. I'll give you an example. I grew up in the Netherlands, and there you really have 3 factors. It's a combination of guilt about the Holocaust. The Netherlands, in total numbers, I think it was approximately 100,000 Jews who were exterminated, so much less than in Poland or Russia or other countries. But it was the highest proportion of Jews of any other country. So that plays a role, but I think a very secondary role. Then you have another factor, which is it's a Calvinist country, so it's dominated by religious movements that take a very literal interpretation of the Old Testament. And I think that plays a secondary role as well. My understanding of why the Netherlands has traditionally been so pro-Israeli is it has nothing to do with Israel and everything to do with the United States. The Netherlands is traditionally a very strongly Atlanticist country. It considers the alliance with the United States central to its national security. And therefore, its support for Israel is primarily a reflection of its belief that it needs to maintain good relations with Washington. In other countries, you have different, I don't know what the main reasons are. Czech Republic is often indistinguishable from Israel. In terms of, I don't know what the reasons are. I'm hoping to learn while I'm visiting here. But then in other countries, for example, the arms trade plays an important role. I think for the United States, it sees Israel as a reliable proxy of Western interests in the Middle East, particularly since 1967. Many European countries buy weapons that have been tested on Palestinians and proven their effectiveness by being tested on humans, and that's something that's considered very valuable by many European governments. So there's economic relations. There's a whole series of motivations, but I think for me the main one is that many Western governments see Israel as a reliable representative of their interests, as a reliable proxy for Western interests in the Middle East.
Thank you. One of the last questions, because we will have to close soon. Yes?
So Israel is an apartheid state.
Excuse me?
So this way. Can I just shout?
No, just use the microphone.
All right. So Israel is an apartheid state, and that's like something we should avoid. And oppressed people, the right for resistance. How far can they go? Well, you are much more well read on this, and I think you have some history precedent for this. But of course, like the United Nations resolutions are kind of a sham because the US and other countries like them interfere with this. But should we allow the Palestinian people to reach for guns and just shoot at anyone they see? Because Israel does have a power resistance, so by extensions we could blame the average citizen of the current wrongdoings of the government. So how far do you think the Palestinians should go in their resistance, and how far is too far, if there is even a too far for their current situation?
Thank you.
Well, I think the answer to your question is very clear, and in fact it's written in black and white. International law, the laws of armed conflict, the additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions make very clear that people living under occupation have the right to resist that occupation, including the use of armed force to resist that occupation and to liberate themselves from occupation. There are also limits on the use of armed force that apply as much to resistance movements and national liberation movements against colonialism as they do to everyone else in terms of indiscriminate violence against civilians and so on. Those are the rights, and the rights are crystal clear. There really isn't an argument about whether it is legitimate or illegitimate for Palestinians to use armed force. It's there in black and white. There is a debate, a strategic debate, about which forms of resistance that are legitimate for Palestinians to use are the most effective, and that's an entirely separate discussion.
Izzat, do you want to respond to that as well, since you're the one really facing on the ground?
For us, as I'm part of a group called Youth Against Settlements, so we are located in Hebron. We believe in non-violence as way to end the occupation. For us, like to be honest, violence creates me or makes me feel sick, because if you go back to Palestine and knock any door, you will see that Palestinians are suffering from the occupation and suffering from violence. So, as a 12 years old, when I was 12 years old, it was during Second Intifada, I saw violence in my life, which is make me feel that as a crazy. I was isolated from my family, from my friend. I couldn't even speak to anyone. Israel doesn't, you know, or we respect the international law. We are trying, like, you know, to tell them, okay, we are not bloody, we are not vicious, we are educated people, we want to live in peace. But really, with all of that, they don't accept. They keep killing for reason or no reason. So I just lost one of my friends because he was crossing the road at checkpoint, and there is no communication between him and between the soldier. The soldier shoot him, kill him for no reason. So not only that case, wherever you go, a few days ago, me and my friend, we were walking through Hebron, through the field, and then I see the laser from the gun machine on his head. I don't know if I have to tell him that there is a laser from the Israeli soldier on your head or not, because I was afraid if I tell him that there is a laser on your head, he might do something strange, and then the soldier will shoot him. So I kept silent, and then I noticed that the soldier, it was on me too. I told him, Muhammad, there is a soldier on us, there is a laser on us. He told me, just keep walking, don't do anything, like, you know, just walking as we are. So we were happy that me and him, we were, you know, just away from the soldier cannot see us, then we breathe. And then we could, you know, say we have a new life. But really, like, you know, for so many reasons, for different reasons, so I feel tired of violence. I see, like, I'm very tired from victims. We already lost a lot as Palestinians, and I think it's the time, to live in peace. I have 4 children, and I'm really worried about them. I don't want them to live as I live. With everything we give, Israel doesn't look for our peace, or they don't see that they have to make a peace with Palestinians. They are on the top and we are here. Why we should look at these people? So that's why it's very hard. Even they don't accept if you believe in violence or non-violence. If you the majority of Palestinians are tired of this life. So they will accept anything just to live as normal people without restriction, without checkpoint, without closure, without killing, without settlements, without apartheid, without ethnic cleansing.
Thank you so much. Our time is up, but I will ask Izzat, can you tell people where you're going to speak in these next days? Do you know?
You have to ask Teresa.
Teresa.
I've heard yes.
Good evening. So we will have an event on Wednesday evening at 7. You can follow on Instagram Collective Tadamu Collective, and there you can ask for the address. It's the completely new space, and it's going to be the first event ever, and it's not fully ready. It's going to be a bit improvised, but we have to use the opportunity to host such incredible guest there. So thank you.
So this is really, time is changing because now there are like more pro-Palestinian events in Prague in one day. So I will, as it happened like a few days ago, and I will inform you also about our next events with Mouin. Tomorrow at the Charles University, Faculty of Arts, Filozofická fakulta na Palchově náměstí, at 6 o'clock. Mouin's going to be giving a lecture about development of the Palestinian national movement. So basically from even before 48 and then PLO and even Hamas and everything. We should know everything what there is to know and not just let the media and the usual talking heads Hasbara to tell us what to think. So that's going to be tomorrow from 6, Faculty of Arts. And Wednesday, we're going to have also event with Mouin. And that's going to be Gaza, the topic is going to be Gaza apocalypse, causes and consequences. And a debate, it's going to be followed by a debate with Zora Hesova and Pavel Barsha. And it's going to take place in Klub Techniku. To je vedle Karlova mostu vlastně, takže klub Techniku Novotného Lávka 5, také od 6, sorry, I changed to Czech. Klub Techniku, which is next to the Charles Bridge, Novotného Lávka 5, from 6 o'clock evening. And it's going to be based actually on upcoming book by Mouin Rabbani. And just lastly, I want to catch your attention to these 2 books. This one is in English, and one chapter is by Mouin as well. And you will find many, many details and information here about the history of Gaza, of the Israeli politics towards Gaza, what a concentration camp basically it was before October 7, because that history didn't start then. That's in English, and we have in Czech, Avi Schleim, translated to Czech, Israel-Palestine revision. It's a long title, but it's basically about all that Hasbara, about the so-called peace process. So all those behind information, even from negotiation tables, what we touched on here with Arafat and Nasrawi, all that is there. And as you probably know, Avi Schleim is an Israeli or former Israeli historian, new historian, one of those who uncovered the facts about 1948 from Israeli archives. And he concludes in the end that this whole so-called peace process was just a bogus, as you heard from Mouin as well, and as you will hear from others who actually know the facts. So if you want to educate yourself or your family, please get this book. So again, thank you so much everyone who came and joined us again for more talks. And this is of course not the last amazing guests we've had, and we're gonna keep going. So hopefully we'll see you and more of your friends and even family. Thank you so much. Wow, exactly on time.